Sweet. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our very first Impact Ambassador webinar. We're super excited to have you all here and we can't wait to get started. But first, I thought I'd just give a quick primer on what the Impact Ambassador program is, because we will be sharing a recording of this event with all of our communities afterwards. So at its core, the Impact Ambassador program is all about helping people learn where to give. To date, over 25 experts have joined in their fields as ambassadors, and based on their expertise and their experiences, they share the charities that they know donors can feel super confident giving to. Ambassadors have championed a wide range of causes, from animal welfare to supporting vulnerable seniors in our community. And tonight, our focus is going to be on environmental sustainability and how to save the planet while being charitable. So each of the Impact Ambassadors that are on our panel tonight have developed a portfolio of charities that they know make a huge impact in the space of environmental sustainability. This means that if you care about the environment, but you don't quite know which charities to support, their portfolios are one of the best resources out there.
Yeah, and now I would like to introduce Emma Gilchrist, our host for this evening. She's an award-winning journalist, editor, and public speaker. She started her journalism career more than 15 years ago, and today Emma is editor-in-chief and executive director of The Narwhal. The Narwhal is an award-winning online magazine that publishes in-depth and investigative journalism about Canada's natural world. And when I say award-winning, I mean that in the first year alone, The Narwhal was nominated for 16 national awards. So if you want to learn more, please visit thenarwhal.ca. And before I leave you with Emma and our ambassadors, a quick reminder to please leave your questions in the chat. Throughout the event, we're going to mention those questions, or we're going to save them for a Q&A session at the end. And with that, I leave you with Emma. Again, thank you so much for being here with us and for helping us moderate the discussion today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to get to be part of this event. The Impact Ambassadors program is just brilliant, and what a delight to get to host a conversation with three brilliant young women. So first of all, I'm in Victoria tonight, and that means that I'm on the unceded Coast Salish territory and the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people. And what I'm going to do first here is just introduce all of our panelists, and then we're going to get into a round of questions. So tonight we have Elyse Crowston with us, and she's the Director of Impact Investing Relations at Rhiza Capital. And she actually has a background in the charitable sector. She worked for 4 years at Ecojustice, a great legal charity, which perhaps helps to explain why her portfolio is focused on environmental sustainability through legal action. And then we also have Brianne Miller, who is CEO of NADA, which is a certified B Corporation and package-free grocery store. She's also a marine biologist, and her portfolio focuses on marine conservation and food security. Then we have Njoki Bureau, and she is a social innovation and impact fellow with the HSBC Social Innovation Academy. She's also a recent graduate of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. And her portfolio focuses around environmental and climate justice. So first off, my first question is, I'm going to start with you, Njoki, although everybody's going to answer it eventually. Just tell us a little bit about your journey as an advocate for the environment. What inspired you to get on this path?
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Emma did mention, my name is Njoki Mboro. I'm grateful to be today on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Yes, thank you. I was the first 8 years of my life, I had the opportunity to live with my grandparents on their subsistence farm, and they have always been such great advocates of good food and growing it well. They also do keep some domestic animals, but they are really big on growing local foods. So from them, I gained a lot of joy in being in places where food was respected, and more importantly, land and waters were respected. So I would really give them a lot of credit for my knowledge today. I have also looked up to for many years the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who was a Kenyan environmentalist and the first African woman to receive a Nobel Peace Prize. I hold her as one of my greatest icons and guides, and I believe that those two combinations of my grandparents and my family at large and Professor Maathai have been a great driving force in me getting involved with environmentalism.
Thank you. And what about you, Elyse? What sent you on your journey as an advocate for the environment? What got you onto this path? You're just muted.
You'd think that a year and a half into this that we would figure that out. Also, I'm enjoying the artistic license that the background is taking with my face.
The fact that it just kind of squares off your head sometimes, you know.
And it's going in and out of my eyes, but in any case, we will press on. So for me, the passion about the environmental work really started from when I was a kid, and I was fascinated with when we put our recycling and garbage out on the curbside every week where it went, and my mom took me to a landfill. And it was a shocking and life-changing experience as a kid to see that, like, you think that things just go away and they don't. Like, there's birds eating them, like just the devastation and the disconnection we have from our waste never left me. And so I knew from being a young kid that I wanted to work in being a solution to that. And so that put me on a path of a degree in freshwater governance and policy, which led me to Ecojustice. And my work in impact investing is very much correlated, where it's all about a changing of incentives. And so how do we change our economic incentives from things just going in that landfill and being forgotten to returning that to the economy, giving the value that we owe to the planet that it enriches and enables our lives. And how do we bring quantitative economics into that? Yeah, so thanks for having me.
Awesome, thank you. And Brianne, you started out as a marine biologist and ended up running this quickly growing store. Tell us about how you got on this path in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So very, very similar to the other two. Was really lucky to be surrounded by a family that really loved and appreciated the environment growing up. Spent so much time camping as a child that my sister and I got over it pretty quickly, to the point that we were always asking to stay home on weekends because we were outside so often. Was a lot of my journey is also inspired by my grandparents. So they immigrated to Canada in the 50s and were just always huge advocates of reuse, having gone through the Great Depression and World War II. And my mom grew up in a family that reused every single thing from tea bags to pieces of string. And that's something that I always admired and really appreciated in my family. And yeah, my love of the ocean kind of turned into this career in marine biology. I studied both biology and marine mammal science for my master's degree, and was really fortunate to live and work and travel in a lot of really wonderful and remote places around the world. And very quickly it became quite eye-opening just how global and widespread this plastic pollution problem was. There has not been a single dive that I've been on that I haven't seen some form of plastic. Every remote beach that I've been on has been littered with some sort of marine debris or plastic pollution. And it just really got me thinking, like when you actually see it and you're walking a beach and you see brands and shampoo bottles and things that you recognize, I was like, I'm using these things in my everyday life. Like, how can I actually try to change that narrative? And realized really quickly that our food system was directly impacting the health of our ocean. So everything from agricultural runoff to pesticides and fertilizers and ocean noise and plastic pollution, all of these things were linked to the way that we were supporting this industrial food system. And that's what I wanted to change.
Fabulous. Okay, well, now that we know a little bit more about each of you, now we want to know about how you built your portfolios, why you chose the charities that you did, and how their work is making a difference. So let's start back with you and Joki.
Thank you so much for asking that. I was fortunate to be matched with Linda Nolan, who is now directing the UBC Sustainability Initiative Office. And so Linda has been really helpful. We've worked together to determine how we'll build our portfolio. And for when we discussed what we found out what was important for us was to address different topics that all together brought environmental justice and climate justice to the center. One of those topics is definitely the legal aspects. So we chose Raven, that was part of that, and we also included Ecojustice. And then we also did have more educational aspect, which I think is also very important in looking for environmental justice and climate justice. So we looked at Environmental Youth Alliance, which works with Black, Indigenous, and youth of color across Vancouver, especially in the downtown area, who are facing barriers, social and economic barriers, to reconnect them to land and growing and native plants. So that was an educational aspect. And then we also looked further into other education. Sierra Club is doing a lot with regards to decolonizing education practices on climate change. So it was a mix of all these. And I forgot to mention West Coast environmental law. So these were all the ways in which we were looking at building a portfolio, is what areas are all collaborating to build and create a more just world environmentally and with regards to climate change.
Excellent. Yeah, it's such a great list of charities when you look through everybody's portfolios. I had a good deep dive into it this morning, and it's so interesting to see the different mix that everybody has. How about you, Elyse? How did you go about picking your charities, and how is the work of those charities making a difference?
You can take it as an extra endorsement that Njoki and I have actually chosen several the same charities like West Coast Environmental Law and Ecojustice, and just building on all of her great reasons. For me, it's also about entrenching environmental sustainability, and the recourse for violating those laws is a systemic solution. So, it's absolutely vital that we clean up pollution, but it's also, in my opinion, as or more important that we criminalize pollution and create a framework in which it needs to be cleaned up, and who pays for that. And also legal precedent, and I use the small c conservative, is it a conservative institution in that it's not supposed to be prone to wild changes in political regime. So we should be able to rely on a sort of a steady hand guiding how we interact with the planet and with our resources. And then the other reason for me is also, I think that philanthropic giving, and part of the reason I believe in impact investing, is that creating, the way that we generate wealth and then what we do with that wealth to do good is like we generate something that's destructive and then we give to charity in order to clean that money. But we need to break that connection, and we need to generate money with regenerative businesses like great companies like NADA that are solving problems, and then we need to create systemic solutions with our philanthropic dollars that kind of feed back into that system. So rather than fixing the symptoms of a problem, we need to fix the underlying cause. And one of the best and most efficient ways to do that is to support the work of charities like Ecojustice that do things like try to entrench the right to a healthy environment into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Like, these are ways that we can affect the multitude of laws with complicated but very exciting legal action.
Yeah, it's such important work. Now, Brianne, you have a little bit of a different list with a different focus. So can you tell us about why you chose your charities and what they're getting done in the world?
Yeah, we do. So a lot of the charities that are in my portfolio are ones that were inspired by our work through NADA as a 1% for the so NADA's been a 1% for the Planet company since we were our very first pop-up shop, when we were donating, $50 at a time. And it's now evolved into some really incredible relationships with a lot of grassroots local organizations that we've worked with over the past 4 or 5 years. We're kind of coming at this environmental conversation from a different side. So we're really big advocates of individual action, and we really believe that can start with education. So a lot of the organizations that we work with are ones that are connecting BIPOC youth to nature, like the Environmental Youth Alliance, and Sea Smart is getting kids outside to actually experience the ocean and learn how, you know, how special we are to live in a place like Vancouver where we have access to the ocean and the mountains and trees. And yeah, I think it really starts at a young age. The organizations that we work with do a ton of work with kids to address really important issues like marine conservation and food security. And they start at a really young age. And I just think there's such important conversations to have that continue to stem into the way that kids develop and think about their actions when it comes to purchasing and what organizations they want to support. And there's some really, really exciting ways that that tends to interact with policy, like thinking big picture, right? Like policy is often lagging behind these social movements. And when we get enough people rallying behind particular causes, we can actually push policy through voting and different legislation as well. So we're really excited to continue to engage people at the grassroots level.
Wonderful. You know, it just reminds me that I remember when I first kind of stepped into the environmental movement, you know, before I was in it, I thought it was just this sort of like monolithic thing. It's often referred to, you know, in the media as just like the environmental movement, and you would, you know, think that it's almost all the same. But once you really step into it, there's such a diversity of approaches and different types of groups, different areas of focus. And I think that's, you know, really wonderful that as ambassadors, you're able to kind of cast a light on those different approaches, which each have their place in a kind of larger theory of change. And, you know, keeping in mind, like a lot of people aren't thinking about this stuff day in and day out, perhaps the way that some of us are. And Joki, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what environmental justice and climate justice really is and how race and environmentalism intersect.
Thank you for the question. I'll actually just draw up something I had written, which I think will be published soon. But the environmental justice, this is a definition that I'll be giving today is a direct quotation from Dr. Robert J. Ballard. He's known as the father of environmental justice. What he defines environmental justice as is that environmental justice embraces the principle that all people and communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. So often the case that brings up environmental injustice is when certain communities have to experience higher levels of toxic waste or toxic air around them and maybe don't even have access to clean water. So in that case, it's environmental injustice. And then we have climate justice, which is an insisting on the shift from us discussing climate change just with regards to like, like changing water levels and changing seasons or weather patterns, and moving also into discussing who exactly is impacted disproportionately because of this. So this is bringing in the human and social aspect to the changes that are happening because of human-induced climate change or fossil emissions. So how does race come into all of this? From many observations and research articles, unfortunately, there's a lot of observations that folks that are racialized and Indigenous communities and Black communities and people of color, especially those who are also economically marginalized, often experience and live in spaces where they are having to navigate toxic waste in their neighborhoods, or really poor low quality air, or just higher risk in certain hazardous weathers or like natural disasters. So a lot of times it is the communities that often don't even have the capacity or ability to engage in actions that perpetuate climate change, like excessive mining of fossil fuels, who often feel the brunt or the heavy side of the impacts of climate change and poor care for environment. So this is how race comes in, is that these communities are often racialized immigrants or Black communities or Indigenous communities that are experiencing the difficult conditions of having to live in a world that is increasingly polluted, highly extractive, and dismissive of the need for equity and equality.
Thank you. You explained that just so well. I'm sure that gave everybody a much clearer idea of what people are talking about when they're talking about environmental justice and environmental racism. Now, Elyse, I think, people bandy around the phrase like sustainable investing and impact investing quite a bit, but a lot of people who, may not really know what that means. What is sustainable investing and why is it important to reconcile environmental and economic interests?
Thanks. And I will just say I can't turn off the background for some reason. I can change it, but I am not able to turn it off. So let's just enjoy the abstract version of my face. So sustainable investing takes many forms and many acronyms: socially responsible investing, ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And in our case, in impact investing. So the main difference is that with a socially responsible mutual fund or things like that, what that really means is that certain things are being excluded. So fossil fuels, certain types of fossil fuels, oftentimes natural gas will be included, but tobacco, firearms, in some cases like private prisons. So those are being excluded from certain things. But in the case of impact investing, the intent is to drive a positive environmental or social change with where you're investing. So in the case of Rhiza, we invest in companies that are headquartered in British Columbia that have a tie to one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so that means that the business, whether it's a product or service, is central to the business model, or what the business is a solution to one of those problems. And so we can track that with the indicators and sub-indicator framework that are offered by the goals. There's a variety of different ways of measuring impact, but really that's the one key piece, is that you're intent on delivering a solution with that capital. And why that's important is, and kind of referenced this before, is that we've been raised in this tradition that you can do good with your money by giving to charity, but we don't necessarily look at where that money came from. So if we can change where that wealth was generated, like Njoki was, resource extraction, and us as settlers and colonizers of North America, like our wealth is overwhelmingly predicated on the extraction of wealth from this land, much to the peril of indigenous peoples. But just giving to a charity that might help disenfranchised people doesn't necessarily do everything to clean where that money came from. And so trying to change the economic incentives and change the economic system so that we can now generate wealth and prosperity with private enterprise, rather than having to just give to charity, which is also wonderful and valuable. But we will need less of that if we can change how we generate wealth.
Awesome, that's really helpful. And we have a related question for you from the audience. The question is, for novice investors, is it too risky to start with sustainable investing? Is it difficult to switch investments into impact investments?
I love this question. Is it too risky? One of the things that COVID has shown us is that things that are screened for positive impact are outperforming things that are conventional. Now, you can look at this in various different ways, but on balance, companies that take care of their workers and offer solutions, doesn't even have to be in the health space, but that value a multi-stakeholder relationship. So people, planet, and profit are all important to how the company runs, are outperforming things that are purely extractive. So no, it is not too risky. The timing is perfect. And there's also there's so many more options that are less risky. So for Rhiza Capital, we're a venture capital fund. There is definitely risk in investing with us. We do everything that we can to mitigate that risk and diversify and reduce individual exposure. But you can do things as simple as, like, rather than banking with a big bank with a credit union. There's different options within certain credit unions, and I'm happy to speak more in depth with that individual or multiple individuals if they want to get more into it. But even on things like Wealthsimple, like you can participate in exchange traded funds that are only in B Corps or only in women-led companies. Like, there are so many different options available to just like your retail normal individual that it's the timing is perfect.
Excellent. Well, that's a nice, handy answer. Now, Brianne, just switching to a totally different topic entirely, how is our current food system threatening marine life?
Yeah. First of all, I'm very excited to chat with you, Elyse, maybe later about some of the ETFs that do align with those goals. It's something that I've been really excited to get into in the last little while. And yeah, it really is an amazing concept that you can start to shuttle your money into organizations that are doing good. I think things are definitely headed in the right direction. In terms of the food system and threatening marine life, I think the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that the food system isn't broken. It was actually designed to be this way. So there are a lot of underlying systems that really disproportionately impact people, and that plays out on the impacts on the ocean. So there are a lot of different things that we don't often think about. So as you know, a global economy that's relying on shipping goods and food around the world, there are things like ocean noise that we don't actually think about. So we have a lot of ships traversing the planet, and all of these vessels create a lot of underwater noise. It's kind of like being in a loud party. You're having to like yell over someone to like get your point across. And that's just what it's like for a lot of animals and marine mammals, which is where a lot of my work was focused on. They're expending a lot more energy to communicate and forage. And so there are a lot of really wide ecosystem implications on populations from things like shipping. Agricultural runoff is a really big one as well. So our industrial food system relies on a huge amount of inputs in terms of pesticides and fertilizers. And ultimately, a lot of these chemicals make their way into rivers and ultimately flow into the ocean. And I've actually worked, the vast majority of my field sites in the past have been in dead zones. So there are these anoxic areas where all of these pesticides flow into the ocean, and you get algal blooms that actually use up all the oxygen, making it really inhabitable for a lot of species. So those are two big ones. And then one of the things that we're trying to focus our efforts on are the plastic pollution conversation. So plastic is really tricky because it's this synthetic material that it breaks down in terms of size, but in reality, it actually never goes away. It just keeps breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics. They're so small that they make their way through our water filtration systems and ultimately do make their way into the ocean, where because they're so small, they look like food for a lot of fish. And this can have a lot of impacts on us as well, because once they enter the food chain, if they get eaten, those fish get eaten by bigger fish, and then ultimately get eaten by us as well. So there's kind of this whole circle in terms of like big picture thinking about the food chain and how that can impact the ocean. So those are just a few of the big picture examples that we're trying to work on.
Excellent. I get the sense you could probably give an entire 1 hour on that topic.
Yeah.
We have another question from the audience, and I think maybe everybody has something to say on this one, but I know especially you will, Brianne. The question is, what do you think about the concept of voting with your dollar? Sometimes it can feel a bit futile. Is it truly meaningful?
Yeah, I definitely understand that perspective. I absolutely do think it is so important to vote with because ultimately corporations won't exist if people or corporations that have some sort of environmental impact won't survive if people aren't purchasing their goods. So absolutely, like voting with your dollar, choosing to shuttle your money, especially to the local economy, is just something that's so important. Like for every dollar that's purchased within the local economy, I don't remember the actual percentage, but I think it's quite high, like 50 or 60% gets recirculated into the local economy. And the environmental impacts that stem from that are, it's just this like positive feedback loop. And yeah, absolutely. Kind of like what I mentioned before, it does also lead to policy change as well. So when you get a lot of people like choosing to spend a certain way or choosing to support different organizations or choosing to boycott other ones, that's when you really start to see a lot of momentum around things like the zero waste movement that ultimately do push policy. And policy tends to lag behind a little bit, but a lot of it is driven by consumer demand.
Great. And Joki, Elyse, do you have thoughts on this question about the concept of voting with your dollar and how meaningful that is?
Oof, I honestly think I have too much more to add than what Brianne has said. So I'll just pause my answer there.
Sorry, I'm paying attention while also trying to correct this odd issue. The only other thing I would add is like there's a lot of choices in the B Corp movement. So NAT is a great B Corp. Rhiza Capital is a B Corp. B Corp is the seal. It's like organic food business for good. Like it's a seal on your packaged products that you can look for, or in the companies that you choose to work with. And you know that they've been independently audited for how they treat the planet and their workers, what their governance model is. So when you can, choose a B Corp. But my entire career or business is that you can make a difference with your dollar, and giving people multiple options to do that. So I would say that's, our dollars are like votes that we make all the time. It's incredibly important. It just incidentally, like how I ended up in impact investing was I was working at Ecojustice, and as I was, closing the biggest financial thing in my life, my partner and I doing our mortgage, I realized through it, the bank that we were getting our mortgage through was invested in all of the things that I was working against at Ecojustice. Like once you go down this rabbit hole of what is your money doing on your behalf, you'd be really surprised to see and probably a bit horrified. So voting with your dollars, and that means everything from where your money is in terms of like what institution, whether it's a credit union or a bank, and what you're invested in, but also like where you buy your food, what's in your food, the clothing that you wear. It can become really daunting, but it's also really empowering once you start to be able to see the differences in things that you buy. And so I think that it also feels really good because we all spend money, we're all live in a consumer society, and it's little differences that you can make in your individual choices. The laws won't change overnight, but where you buy your food could.
Actually, I do have something to add. Thank you, Brianne and Elyse. I just got the thought and I guess reminder from my home in Kenya about how voting with our dollars or our whatever currency we're using actually also hinges on us having those dollars in the first place. And a lot of this world is living in terrible conditions and really bad states of poverty. So I have personal interest in the food systems and food security. And when I noticed that, a lot of people who have small amounts of money often are forced to spend on food that is cheapest. And that may give a sense, if viewed without context, it may give a sense that we're voting to keep promoting those corporations that are providing ultra processed and unhealthy foods. But that is not the case. And the situation is actually that people are being denied economic equity to access healthier foods and to go to places where they can buy what is considered organic and healthy and non-chemical processed foods. So I think also I really want to keep highlighting what Brianne is saying, that it's a very broken policy situation that is keeping people only able to access and vote for things that are cheapest. And often those things that are cheapest have to cut costs somewhere else. And that means either paying their employees really cheaply or having to use products and chemicals that are making the food quicker, grow quicker, and hormones that are making the food grow quicker. So I think it's a bigger issue that hinges on who has the dollars in the first place.
That's a really, really excellent point. And, it just makes me think about, I think so often there are these kind of like either or, debates about different approaches. And it's like, yes, voting with your dollar is meaningful. It's also not everything, and we need to kind of vote in all the ways that each individual may have the ability to vote. And at the same time as making individual changes meaningful and can be a great starting point, we still need that systemic change because not everybody is able to make that individual change, and not everybody would choose to make that individual change, even if they could. So it's kind of takes all approaches. The longer that I work on these topics, the more I come to that conclusion. Now, Njoki, I have just a small question for you here, which is, what are the challenges that you find movements face to create real change? Which kind of gets at this issue of differing approaches again, you know, because sometimes incrementalism can come in and sometimes that endangers real change. You know, you get some change, but maybe you don't get the true systemic change.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That I feel like every year, I think problems are becoming more complex, or not just every year. So just so often the problems are becoming more difficult to define and therefore harder to break apart and solve. So that would be something maybe like a lot of, but a lot of movements are facing is maybe you're going to try and solve the challenge with accessing fresh vegetables for a certain community. And then you realize at the same time that because with that challenge comes another problem of accessing the community in the first place. Maybe it's the infrastructure in the area is quite difficult. And again, now we have the challenge of we can't really easily move towards one another. We have to social distance. So yes, I'd say the complexity of problems increasingly is becoming a challenge to movements creating change, but also I would say it's the identification with a certain ideal and a performance to an ideal. If I break this down, it's when someone is in a movement, and their environmental movement is really large in itself. It's not just like a altogether kind of circle. There's so many layers to it. But when someone identifies with a movement, I believe that many of us choose to perform a certain way because that movement ascribes us to do that, to look a certain way or to speak a certain way, to hashtag certain things. So once we're in that ideal and mindset, it often closes us out to what other people may bring in that could help our movement. Although we don't align fully with like what they're saying, there are some aspects of what other movements are saying that could be really helpful. So I feel like those are that's one of the big challenges is this narrow-minded approach to this is how we have to solve this problem. Like if the movement is looking at food justice, like, oh, the only way we can solve this is by making food cheaper. But then another movement is like, no, that's not how we're going to solve it. We have to make it more more organic in this, which means it's more expensive. So I feel like it's just the release of the ideal and the release of the performance and just choosing not to ascribe to having to be a certain way. And therefore just opening it up to, yeah, we may have differing opinions, but what is your strength in this argument and what is mine and how can we build that together? I think that's how I would say is the challenge.
That sounds like excellent advice for everyone. If only we had all of our politicians on here listening. Elyse, I see that you're back from your kind of strobe light experience and just looking totally normal now. It's a little bit boring, to be honest. You were such a great source of entertainment. But my next question for you is, what impact do you think environmental legal action has in tackling urgent environmental problems?
So that's a really important question. And the first thing is in empowering people to take the law, to advocate on behalf of themselves is an empowering act in and of itself. So rather than, and without getting too existential on it, but you know, there is a certain colonial mentality in dispensing charity and in dictating what that solution is. So legal action in and of itself, by donating into a charity like, say, Ecojustice, where your charity dollars are going to pay the salaries of the lawyers, but the lawyers function on behalf of their clients, and the clients are the people who are being affected by whatever is the problem. So those clients dictate what's happening on their behalf. So they have agency. And that in and of itself is a really important distinction in why legal action is, I think, incredibly important. But then also because it sets a lasting precedent. So, you know, then there's two reasons why that's important. So, you know, you need the laws to inhibit pollution or inhibit like decimating of the habitat of an endangered species, but you also need those laws to be enforced. So legal action, like the charities in my impact portfolio, they take cases that will achieve those important legal precedents. Like an important one is protection for the orca whales in the West Coast, because they're a keystone species, and so you have to protect their habitat. So it ended up protecting all of the species, but Brianne can speak much more articulately about that. But also then you have to have legal action that will take the government to court if they don't enforce their own laws. So it's a lot of work. It requires a lot of resources, but it's also achieves what should be a lasting impact.
Yeah,
and allow people to empower themselves in order to enforce it.
Mm-hmm. I think so many people who, maybe aren't like reading environmental news every day of their lives don't realize that groups like Ecojustice actually have to take the Canadian government to court to get them to enforce their own laws. And, that probably comprises like 10% of the things that we write about on the Narwhal. Like, it's a really big topic of endangered species not getting the protection that they're legally required to get. And the role of those groups is just so vital in kind of holding the government to account.
Yeah, and it's really infuriating once you get down that rabbit hole, but you think of things where like an environmental assessment will say in black and white that one of the byproducts of like a fossil fuel infrastructure project is that the southern resident killer whale is going to go extinct, like from noise pollution, and the government doesn't take that into account as because they're an endangered species, that fossil fuel, like that byproduct is not acceptable, which is the basis for many, many legal challenges taken up by West Coast Environmental Law, Georgian Strait Alliance, and Ecojustice.
Mm-hmm. It just highlights as well this whole idea of these systems being designed to function the way that they are to benefit a very small proportion of people or organizations. Like the way that environmental assessments are done in this country is inherently flawed, and just the way that proponents of these really large scale organizations are the ones that are paying consultants to do the environmental impact system, like the way that money is transacted is flawed. And so, yeah, a lot of the organizations that you support are ones that we work with as well. And they're doing incredible work to try and change some of these systemic issues that are ingrained in the way that we assess environmental issues in this country.
Mm-hmm. So for the people listening, I just want to remind you to write questions in the chat whenever you feel like it. I'm just going to work them in real smoothly so we don't have any awkward silences while I stop and ask you for questions. So just keep them coming. And in the meantime here, I have another question for you, Brianne, and it's kind of pivoting back to like the hopeful individual action type topic. Mm-hmm. So Canadians send over 5 million tons of food and food packaging waste to the landfill every year. What can we do to help? Can we make a difference with our daily habits?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what I'd like to do is share a bit of a framework that we use at NADA to make every business decision that we make. So this is a framework that doesn't just apply to individuals, it absolutely applies to organizations as well. You don't even need to necessarily be a decision maker with the organization that you're with, like it can kind of apply across all spectrums. So it's this 5 R's framework. So I'm sure many of us on this call have heard of the 3 R's before: reduce, reuse, recycle. We kind of grew up with that. But this framework of 5 R's starts with the most important overarching one, which is refuse. So this whole concept of refusing things that we don't need. So it's often tied to consumption, and it just like causes us to like pause and think, like, do we actually need this thing? So from an individual level, it could be, purchasing some item for your home or a piece of clothing, like taking the time to actually assess if it's something that you need. And on an organization side of things, it could be really wide scale. Like, do you need things like conference bags or, a particular item in your supply chain that you're purchasing 10,000 of? Like, there are a lot of things where if you take the time to assess and get really creative, you'll actually find that there are a lot of items that you don't actually need and you can refuse in the first place. the next ones kind of fall in line, but the second one is to reduce your consumption of things that you do need. So again, applies at the individual level as well. And then reuse and repurposing. So making use of things that you already have. We've got some really great examples in the store of, just really getting creative with how we reuse and recycle things, be it a wall that we had to take down and saving the screws and the framing and insulation to build another wall, or actually like recycling or repurposing our space to hold community events. There's lots of different ways that you can use this framework. And then the last does tie to the food waste conversation. It's rot. So rotting or composting, anything that's left after that whole process. And we do a lot of that in the store as well, in terms of like repurposing and catching any surplus food before it goes bad, and repurposing before it has to rot in the compost.
Excellent. I love that the first R being refuse. That is a great one. We have a great question here from the audience, and it is for everyone. What is your all-time favorite project or single action of a charity or nonprofit organization? So we're just looking for one thing that was awesome that somebody did.
I can go first. And mine is, and it's happening all over the world, not just with the Ecojustice locally. It's young people suing for the right to a future. Suing the governments for not protecting their climate rights, their right to clean water, clean air, and to a prosperous future. And it takes root in, whether it's the US Constitution, rights and freedoms in Canada or many other countries in the world, but young people have a right to the future that their ancestors enjoyed, or if not better. And there's a lot of actions taking place across the world that's robbing them of that. And I think it's incredibly inspiring that people as young as 10, 11 are taking that into their hands. And I choose to be inspired by it, not saddened, which is the other reaction that it elicits in me.
Go, Pian. I can go.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Does it have to be Canadian based?
No, I think it's great to hear inspiration from all over the world.
Oh, thanks, Josh. My response is, there's a wonderful organization in Kenya called Where is the Love? This was founded by one of my former colleagues and now buddies. She's just a young lady who, while doing her internship, noticed that a lot of the media and the political discussions surrounding the youth that were living in informal settlements in Kenya was highlighting them as criminals, and therefore taking them away from the agency to define themselves as just young people who have also their dreams and their hopes. So she specifically works with young folks living in informal settlements in Kenya. And one of the projects that they're doing is actually just like growing lots of fruits and vegetables through like using what Brianne was saying, like repurposing. So there's one of them who gets like containers and cuts them in half and plants strawberries and has a whole strawberry garden happening. And then sometimes together with her friends, they get together and cook a lot of meals and are able to share. Unfortunately, now that's quite difficult to go there presently, but she's doing her best to ensure that the food is still, they're able to access food at least once in a while. And that's just bringing a lot of community care amongst the young people who are facing really difficult economic conditions. So that's been one of my favorites.
Yeah, and for me, it's like a near impossible question to answer. There's so many incredible examples, but I definitely gravitate towards charities and nonprofits that are really working at the hyper local level. Like those are the organizations that really have, great understandings of what their communities need. Similar to the other two, like we do work with a lot of food security organizations as well. Like the Young Agrarians is a really good example. like we love championing organizations that just have that like deep local knowledge, and they're able to think really creatively. So the Young Agrarians, for example, like in the Lower Mainland in BC, we deal with really high costs for agricultural land, and that creates a barrier to new farmers, especially young farmers that are kind of coming up and into the system. And they have a really incredible land matching program that, you know, matches like new farmers with landholders with existing land to, you know, enable new types of farms. And it's just a really incredible program that's, you know, something it's you don't really see often. It's a little bit outside the box. So examples like that are really wonderful to see.
Excellent. We have one other question here too. What parameters do you use to measure the impact created by charities who are working on environmental issues? I would imagine this differs based on the, like we were saying before, there's this sort of kaleidoscope of different charities, different approaches. But yeah, does anybody have any thoughts on that question?
It depends on the charity. I mean, one thing that people often look to, and I would encourage like a nuanced perspective on this, having worked in a charity, often people will look at the allocation of what goes, of the revenue that goes to program and what goes to things like administration or fundraising. But that needs to be put into context of what the organization really does. So for like legal organizations where the programming is people, like paying for lawyers, it's difficult to allocate that. And at the same time, you also want to give to charities that pay their employees living wages. People who work in the charitable sector deserve to make a decent salary. It shouldn't be exorbitant. I mean, there's lots of stories about CEOs of multinational charities taking kind of exorbitant salaries and bonuses. And so I'm not advocating for that, but at the same time, being so hardline about, you know, it shouldn't be poverty wages when you're trying to combat poverty. So that's not really an answer to that question. Other than to
point though.
be specific to the charity that you're looking at. So yeah.
Okay, and we have just one more, and then I'm going to do kind of a closing round. So one other question is sort of about how this idea that some kind of technological advancement is going to like save us from this mess that we've got ourselves into, and we're going to be just fine. You know, and it seems sometimes that this mindset's becoming more prevalent. What do you think about that mindset, that a technological advancement is going to come along and save us? And do any of you find that that's accurate in any way?
I mean, I think there's just so much to be learned from things like indigenous food systems, for example. Like there are just so many like simple solutions that if we like pause and look and learn at how things have been done in the past and how various groups of people have stewarded our land for thousands of years, like I don't necessarily think there's huge technological solutions that need to creep in. I think it's, you know, it's so smart for us to like pause and learn from the wisdom of of people that have lived in our areas for millennia.
I was just thinking on the question of how to measure impact, and as Elyse said, yeah, it's really dependent on the charity. Some of them are using quantifiable metrics to show the impact that they're making. Some of them is a bit more qualified, like more of a qualitative assessment of people's awareness about certain topics, like maybe for a certain organization that's working on reducing certain forms of pollution, maybe people in that neighborhood are more aware on, oh yeah, that's not the best kind of bag to buy or whatnot. So I feel like it's really dependent on the organization that you're looking at. So interesting would be to look at the news in those charities, what they're reporting, their industry reports. All these things are really important to help one understand the impact. And on the note of technology, I absolutely see the importance of technology in elevating some of the challenges that we're facing. So I wouldn't discredit it fully, but I would absolutely say that whatever would take us away from respecting the people and land was not something I would personally condone. So I just hope that alongside that technology comes the actual and genuine respect for all the indigenous knowledge systems that are present and the lands that are there. And of course, any technology that doesn't consider historical context can actually just perpetuate more harm than it is intending to do.
All really great points. And with technology also comes ownership. So we have some reservations about expecting some sort of billionaire savior to come in and fix all of the planet and society's problems. Though certainly, I mean, you can't deny that technology offers solutions, but I mean, we need incremental and we need significant changes in multiple systems, but we also need a shift in mindset collectively, and both of my fellow panelists have already brought up in indigenous knowledge systems, but we need to respect those things. We need to respect the planet. We don't need to save Earth. Earth is going to be fine. We need to get our act together.
Yeah, very good point. So we just have a couple minutes left. I just want to do one last little lightning round of, I want to know what is making you guys hopeful these days. It's a little bit bleak out there in the world at times, but what makes you hopeful? Maybe we'll start with Brianne.
Oh my God, so many things. I think when we look back, just in the last year, I don't know, 2020 has just been a crazy year, right? I think, COVID has just shaken our systems and it's really revealed kind of cracks in those systems. And we're really starting to see a lot of innovation and a lot of creativity coming out of that. I think it's a really amazing time for people to start businesses, to start charities. There's a shift in the way that people work and where we're working from and how you can do that. And there's just so much opportunity. And that's something that really excites me.
For me, it's that young people and all of us included think about money and the planet and the systems in which we interact with all of those things differently than more than the generations came before us. I think about things differently than my grandparents, and I think that that it shows progress and young people, and all of us are included in that. Anyone watching this webinar, there is different, and there's hope in that. But to make that more practical, we're on the precipice of the largest transfer of wealth that's ever occurred. And that wealth is going to come from places that were largely extractive, but now we have options like impact investing or, any of the other numerous solutions where money can be that are regenerative, that go to entrepreneurs that care about the planet and care about the people that work for them. There's so many options of how we can take everything that came before us and place it into things that are the businesses and the economies of the future. And that is, ethereal and naive, but it's also really happening, and it's really exciting and so hopeful. And this is a great time. We can all be a part of it.
Thank you both. I would say what is making me hopeful, one is the increasing attention and work that is being put into community care. A lot of neighborhoods, at least where I am living at the moment, are coming up with their own initiatives of how they'll take care of each other without having to physically be in contact with one another. So we're seeing that, and I'm really appreciating that a lot of needs, say for folks that have disabilities or for seniors, are also being highlighted, and this is being considered in how we're designing our programs that involve community care or food distribution, for example. And another one is that what is also making me hopeful is that there is an increasing, and hopefully this will be sustained, increasing number of people that are opening up to having difficult conversations on topics like sexism and ableism and racism. And I hope that these conversations don't just stay as they are, words lingering in the air, but they are actually put into our daily actions as peoples, but also as leaders of organizations and as members of a society at large.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that this conversation has made me feel quite hopeful. You've all been so insightful and thoughtful and humble and giving in your wisdom tonight. And thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you to Charitable Impact for hosting, and have a lovely night where this is a wrap.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to all of our lovely panelists. Thank you, Emma, so much for hosting this event for us tonight. Yeah, we're absolutely thrilled. I think we all learned so much. Miranda, I'm sure you have a few things to say yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like, yeah, we learned a ton, and just a quick reminder out there. So anyone who joined will be sending each of you 10 charitable dollars to support the impact portfolio of your choice tonight. I'm sure you're feeling quite motivated to check out some of the charities that these experts have included in their portfolios. And that's that. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night, everyone.